Homeless black boy saves a cop from a heart attack. What follows stuns everyone. Marcus had lived on the streets for what felt like forever. His life was a constant battle against the cold, hunger, and loneliness. At just 16 years old, he was no stranger to hardship, but nothing had prepared him for life on the streets of the busy city he found himself in. He didn't choose this life. It had been thrust upon him after escaping a home that wasn't safe for him anymore. His mother had tried to protect him, but the situation was beyond her control. One night, after an argument with his stepfather turned violent, Marcus had run away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a small bag of belongings. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and no idea what would come next. The streets had welcomed him with a cold embrace. The noise, the chaos, the constant movement, it was all too overwhelming. People walked by, oblivious to the boy sitting on the pavement, wrapped in a threadbare jacket, his shoes worn thin from endless walking. Marcus didn't mind much. He had learned how to become invisible. When you were homeless, people didn't want to see you. They avoided eye contact, kept their distance, and pretended like you didn't exist. But Marcus wasn't invisible to himself. He knew he was there, and every day he tried to make the best of it. Life on the streets wasn't easy. Every morning, Marcus woke up to the harsh reality of survival. The first challenge was always finding something to eat. He had learned to be resourceful, scavenging through trash bins behind restaurants or convenience stores. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept him fed, if only for a short while. He had even found a small spot behind an old, abandoned building where he could sometimes nap, away from the prying eyes of police officers who might move him along. It wasn't much, but it was his. And in this world, that was enough. But the world didn't care about boys like Marcus. He was just another nameless face among many. The people he passed by each day were busy with their own lives, their own concerns. They didn't care that he hadn't had a hot meal in weeks, or that he slept in a place that smelled like garbage. They didn't care that he had no future to look forward to. The idea of someone helping him seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. No one helped a homeless boy, especially one like him, with no family, no resources, and no hope. Despite all of this, Marcus tried to hold on to something. There were moments, small moments, that made it easier to survive. He would find a quiet place in the park, away from the noise, and just sit there for a while, watching the birds fly overhead or the clouds drifting by. Sometimes he would watch the people around him, wishing he could be like them. They had families, friends, places to go. They didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from or whether they would be forced to sleep in the cold that night. They didn't have to worry about being invisible. He also helped others when he could. There were a few people living on the streets with him, other men and women who had fallen on hard times. Some were older, some younger, but all of them had a story. Marcus often shared what little he had with them: a sandwich he had found, a blanket he had scavenged. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had learned from his mother that even in the toughest of times, kindness mattered. She had always told him, "You can't change the world, Marcus, but you can change someone's world." But kindness didn't change the fact that Marcus was still on the streets, still struggling. As the days passed, he became more and more accustomed to the routine. He would wake up, find food, try to avoid trouble, and go to sleep, only to repeat the same cycle the next day. It was exhausting, it was lonely, but Marcus kept going because what else was there to do? One of the hardest things about living on the streets wasn't the hunger, the cold, or the exhaustion. It was the loneliness. Marcus hadn't seen his mother in months. He missed her. He missed the way she used to care for him, the way she used to tell him everything would be okay. But that was a long time ago. Now there was no one. He couldn't go back home, not with the way things had been. He didn't even know if she was still there, still in that house with the man who had hurt them both. He didn't even know if she was safe. Some nights Marcus would sit by himself, staring at the ground, lost in his thoughts. The sounds of the city, cars honking, people shouting, the occasional dog barking, were a constant backdrop to his life. But those sounds also reminded him that the world kept moving. People had jobs, families, and plans. Marcus had nothing. Just the streets and the memories of a life he had left behind. But as hard as it was, Marcus refused to give up. He knew that he couldn't control everything, but he could control how he faced the day. He could choose to survive, to keep moving forward, even when it seemed impossible. He could choose to help someone else, even when he had nothing left to give. That was something. That was what kept him going. And so Marcus lived on day by day in a world that didn't notice him, in a world that was too busy to care. He didn't expect anything. He didn't want anything. He just wanted to survive. But life, as he would soon learn, had other plans for him. And one cold night, in a moment he could never have imagined, everything was about to change. It was a cold evening, and the city streets were bustling with their usual chaotic energy. Cars honked as they weaved in and out of traffic, while people hurried by, their faces buried in their phones or wrapped up in scarves to ward off the chill. It was just another night in the city, another ordinary evening that would be filled with the usual sights and sounds. But for Marcus, it wasn't ordinary. He was sitting on the curb outside a small convenience store, the only place he could find to rest for a while. The store's bright lights shone like a beacon in the dark, but Marcus knew better than to go inside. His stomach rumbled from hunger, but he couldn't afford anything. Not today. His eyes scanned the crowd, watching the people rushing by, each person with their own story, their own life, and for the most part, no one noticing him. That was fine. He didn't mind being invisible. In fact, he preferred it that way. But as he sat there, something caught his attention. A police car had pulled up to the store, and a middle-aged officer stepped out of it, his uniform crisp and neat. The officer glanced at his watch before walking into the store. Marcus recognized the man. Officer John was a regular around these parts, a cop who often patrolled the area, always doing his rounds. Marcus had seen him before, but they had never spoken. The officer had never paid much attention to him, and that was okay with Marcus. He didn't expect any different, but tonight something was different. Marcus noticed that Officer John seemed to stumble as he stepped out of the car. His face had gone pale, and his hand clutched at his chest, as if he was struggling to breathe. The officer staggered a few steps before collapsing onto the pavement in front of the store, his body falling limp and still. For a moment, the world around Marcus seemed to freeze. People around the store began to shout, running towards the fallen officer, but no one seemed to know what to do. Some were on their phones, probably calling for help, but others just stood there, panicking. Marcus felt a rush of panic surge through him, but it was quickly replaced with something else. A sharp clarity, a sense of urgency. Without thinking, he stood up from the curb and rushed toward the officer, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew it wasn't good. He had to help. When he reached the officer, he knelt down beside him, his hands trembling. Officer John's face was ashen and his breathing was shallow, coming in ragged gasps. The situation was dire. Marcus had no time to think, no time to hesitate. He had seen something on TV once, a show where a person had collapsed like this and someone had performed CPR to save them. He didn't know exactly how to do it, but he remembered the basics. There was no time for second thoughts. Marcus took a deep breath and pressed his hands onto the officer's chest, just like he had seen on TV. He pushed down, feeling the weight of the officer's body beneath his hands. His mind was racing, but he focused on the rhythm. 1 push, 2 pushes, 3, he counted in his head, trying to steady his nerves. He knew that if he didn't keep going, Officer John might not make it. He couldn't let that happen, not on his watch. The crowd around him had started to grow, but no one else was stepping in to help. People were still shouting, still confused, and some were just standing there, too scared to do anything. It was just Marcus, kneeling on the cold pavement, his hands pressing against Officer John's chest, doing everything he could to save the officer's life. The seconds felt like hours, and every push seemed to take more energy than the last, but Marcus didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, just when he thought he couldn't go on, he heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The paramedics had arrived, but Marcus didn't stop, not yet. He kept going until the paramedics rushed to his side, taking over from where he had left off. They quickly assessed the situation, their movements swift and efficient, and within moments they were preparing the officer to be transported to the hospital. "Good job, kid," one of the paramedics said, patting Marcus on the back. "You saved him." Marcus barely heard the words. He was too exhausted, his body trembling with the effort. He sat back on the curb, trying to catch his breath, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. His heart was racing, but the weight in his chest had started to lift. Officer John was still alive, and Marcus had been the one to save him. It didn't feel real. For a moment, Marcus just sat there, watching the paramedics load the officer into the ambulance, still trying to process everything that had just happened. As the ambulance pulled away, the crowd began to disperse, the people going back to their lives as if nothing had happened. But Marcus couldn't forget what had just occurred. He had saved a life, a cop's life. A man who had never looked at him, never seen him as anything more than another homeless face on the streets. And yet, Marcus had stepped in when no one else would. The weight of the moment didn't fully hit him until later that night when he found himself sitting alone in his small spot behind the abandoned building. He hadn't realized how much it had affected him until now. He had acted without thinking, and in doing so, he had changed everything. He had saved Officer John, and in the process, he had proven something to himself. He wasn't just some invisible boy on the streets. He was capable. He had the power to make a difference. The city was still alive outside his small corner, the sounds of life continuing on as usual. But for Marcus, everything felt different now. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. He felt like he mattered. The days that followed Marcus's heroic act felt like a blur. The city, with all its noise and chaos, seemed to keep moving at the same frantic pace. But for Marcus, everything had shifted. He had saved Officer John's life, and it was a strange feeling to know that his actions had made such a difference. As he sat in his usual spot behind the abandoned building, the weight of what had happened started to sink in. The first sign that things had changed came when he heard the news. It was a few days after the incident when a group of people gathered around a radio outside a small cafe. They were talking about the officer who had collapsed in the street and how a homeless boy had saved him. The details were all over the news, how a young, homeless teenager had performed CPR and kept the officer alive until paramedics arrived. The city was talking about him. Marcus didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, he was glad that Officer John was alive. But on the other hand, he had never wanted attention, especially not for something like this. He was used to blending into the background, staying out of sight. But now, his name was being mentioned on the radio, on TV, and in conversations around the city. People were calling him a hero, and while part of him felt proud, another part of him wanted to shrink back into the shadows. But the attention didn't stop there. The very next day, Marcus found himself face to face with someone he never expected to meet, Officer John. The officer had been released from the hospital and was walking down the street near the store where Marcus had helped him. He spotted Marcus sitting on the curb, as usual, and walked over. Marcus didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected to see the officer again, certainly not this soon. "Hey, you," Officer John said, his voice calm but full of gratitude. "I owe you my life. I can't thank you enough." Marcus looked up at him, surprised. He had never expected the officer to come looking for him, let alone thank him. He didn't know what to say. I didn't do anything special," Marcus mumbled. "I just did what anyone would have done." The officer shook his head, his expression serious. "Not true. You saved me, kid. Not many people would have done that, especially not under the circumstances. You've got something special inside you." Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't used to hearing praise. He had always been the one people ignored, the one people avoided. But here was Officer John, a man who had every reason to be angry or frustrated with his situation, thanking him as if he had done something extraordinary. It felt strange. "Come on," Officer John said, sitting down next to him. "Let's talk." They talked for a while, and Marcus listened as the officer shared stories about his life, his work, and how he had come to be in the right place at the right time to be saved. But what stood out the most to Marcus was how the officer treated him. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment. He was just another person, offering kindness where it was needed. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he wasn't invisible. After a while, Officer John stood up. "Listen," he said, "I know you've probably been through a lot, and I want to help. I've got a friend who runs a construction company. He's always looking for good workers, and I think you do well there. You've got heart, kid. Don't waste it." Marcus blinked, unsure of what he was hearing. A job? A real job? He had never had the chance to work to earn money to do something with his life. He had always felt trapped on the streets, like there was no way out. But here was Officer John offering him an opportunity. It felt almost unreal. "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice hesitant. "I've never had a job before. I don't know if I can do it." The officer smiled, a warm and reassuring smile. "You don't have to know everything. I'll help you get started. The first step is just showing up." That's all anyone can ask for. Marcus thought about it for a moment. A job, a chance to change things. It wasn't the life he had expected, but maybe it was the life he could have. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know where it would lead, but maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something better. The next few days were a whirlwind of new experiences. Officer John had arranged for Marcus to meet with his friend, and soon Marcus was starting work at the construction company. It wasn't easy. The work was hard, and there were times when he felt overwhelmed, unsure if he could keep up. But something inside him pushed him forward. He wasn't the same boy who had run away from home months ago. He had changed. And he knew that the only way out of this life was to keep moving forward. At the construction site, Marcus learned quickly. He worked alongside men who, though they didn't always understand his background, treated him with respect. They didn't see a homeless kid. They saw a young man trying to make something of himself, and that made all the difference. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was part of something real, something that mattered. As the weeks went by, Marcus's life began to take shape. He found a small apartment, one that he could afford with the money he was earning from his new job. It wasn't much, but it was his. He didn't have to worry about where he would sleep anymore. He didn't have to hide from the cold or from the people who would turn their backs on him. He was building a life, step by step. But the real turning point came when he received a letter. It was from Officer John. The letter was short, but it carried a weight that Marcus could feel. In it, the officer wrote about how proud he was of Marcus, how he had shown courage and determination in ways that most people never would. He told Marcus that he had a future, one that was bright and full of possibilities if only he kept going. Marcus read the letter over and over again. It was the kind of encouragement he had never received before. It wasn't just about getting a job or surviving. It was about believing in himself, about knowing that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was no longer alone in the world. Officer John had become his mentor, his friend. And with that, Marcus knew that he had a chance, an actual chance, to build the life he had always dreamed of. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus's life began to change in ways he never thought possible. The job at the construction company, though hard and physically demanding, gave him a sense of purpose he had never known before. For the first time, he woke up every morning with a goal, with a reason to get out of bed. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building a future. The workers at the site had become his second family. They didn't judge him for his past, for being homeless. They treated him like one of their own, showing him the ropes, teaching him the skills he needed to become a better worker. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when Marcus felt overwhelmed. But he pushed through, determined to prove to himself and to everyone around him that he could succeed. Officer John had kept his word. He had been there for Marcus every step of the way, offering advice, encouragement, and even small acts of kindness that meant the world to Marcus. He helped Marcus find a small, affordable apartment on the outskirts of town, a quiet place where he could sleep without worrying about his safety. It wasn't much, just a small studio with barely enough room for a bed and a table, but it was his. It was a space he could call home, a place where he could start over. At first, Marcus didn't know how to handle the freedom that came with having his own space. He had spent so long on the streets that the idea of a home seemed almost foreign. But over time, he began to settle in. He kept his apartment clean and tidy, something that gave him a sense of pride. He started cooking simple meals for himself, something he hadn't done in years. The small victories, the little moments of normalcy, began to add up. And each day, Marcus felt a little more like the person he had always wanted to be. He started saving money, a little at a time, setting aside a portion of his paycheck each week. His financial situation was still tight, but he was managing. He didn't have the luxuries he had once dreamed of, but he didn't need them. What he had now was enough. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt in control of his life. He wasn't just drifting along anymore. He was actively working toward something, toward a future where he could stand on his own 2 feet. As the months passed, Marcus began to feel more confident. He wasn't the same shy, uncertain boy who had once walked the streets in search of survival. He was a young man who had learned to work hard, to persevere, and to believe in himself. He knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life wasn't perfect, and there would always be obstacles to overcome, but he was no longer afraid of them. He had already faced some of the toughest moments of his life, and he had come out stronger on the other side. One evening, as Marcus sat in his apartment, he received a call that would change everything. It was from Officer John. The officer's voice on the other end was calm, but there was a hint of excitement in it. "Marcus," Officer John said, "I've been thinking. There's a program for people like you, people who are trying to get back on their feet, people who have shown they have what it takes. It's a mentorship program for young people who want to get into law enforcement. I think you'd be perfect for it." Marcus was silent for a moment, surprised by the offer. He had never considered law enforcement as a career. He had always seen police officers as figures of authority, people who were far removed from his own world. But now, with everything that had changed in his life, the idea didn't seem so far-fetched. "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice uncertain. "I've never thought about being a cop. I don't know if I'd be good at it." "Look, Marcus," Officer John said, "I see something in you. You've got the heart, the drive, and the ability to learn. I wouldn't be suggesting this if I didn't believe in you. You've already proven that you can do the hard work. Now it's just about taking the next step. This could be a real opportunity for you." Marcus sat back, processing the words. The idea of becoming a police officer seemed so distant, so out of reach. But then he thought about everything he had gone through, everything he had learned. He had come so far in such a short time. Maybe, just maybe, this was the next step. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, his voice steady. He wasn't sure yet if he was ready for this kind of change, but the thought of a new opportunity, a chance to serve and help others the way Officer John had helped him, was something that intrigued him. Over the next few days, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the offer. He talked to Officer John about it again, asking more questions about what the program involved, what it would take to become a part of it. The more he learned, the more he realized that this could be a turning point in his life. Becoming a police officer wasn't something he had ever imagined for himself, but now it felt like the natural progression from everything he had done to get to this point. Marcus knew that joining the program wouldn't be easy. It would require hard work, dedication, and sacrifices, but he had already proven to himself that he was capable of doing hard things. He had fought for a better life on the streets. He had saved a man's life. And now he was being offered a chance to take that courage and determination into something bigger. It was a big decision, but Marcus knew that it was one he had to make. He wasn't just looking for a job or a way to survive anymore. He was looking for a purpose. And becoming a police officer, helping others the way Officer John had helped him, seemed like the perfect way to give back, to make sure that no one else had to go through the struggles he had faced alone. A few weeks later, Marcus made the decision. He applied for the mentorship program and began preparing for the next chapter of his life. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles, moments of doubt, and challenges ahead, but Marcus was ready. He had already faced the hardest parts of life, and now he was ready to take on this new challenge with everything he had. And so Marcus's journey continued. From a homeless boy on the streets to a young man with a future, he had come a long way. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Marcus was no longer the boy who had once felt invisible. He was a young man with a purpose, ready to take on the world. Months passed, and Marcus continued to prove himself in every way possible. The journey from the cold, unforgiving streets to a stable life had been long and challenging, but he had never lost sight of his goals. Each day, he woke up with a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. And it wasn't just the work at the construction site or his small apartment that kept him going. There was something more now. Marcus was becoming someone he had never imagined he could be, a man with dreams, with ambition, and with hope. When he first started working at the construction site, he was unsure of his place in the world. He had never worked a day in his life, had never had the opportunity to make something of himself. But with each passing day, the pieces started to fall into place. The men at the site taught him everything they could, and Marcus absorbed it all. How to handle tools, how to read blueprints, and how to take pride in the work he did. Every step forward made him feel more capable, more confident. His work ethic had earned him the respect of the crew. They saw how hard he worked, how determined he was to learn, and how, despite his past, he had a heart that was willing to help others. Marcus had started taking on bigger responsibilities at the site, often being entrusted with tasks that required a higher level of skill. It wasn't easy, but he pushed through. Every challenge, every new task was another step in the right direction. He wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. He was building a future. Still, the most significant change had come in the form of his relationship with Officer John. The man who had once been a stranger, someone Marcus had never expected to speak to, had become a mentor, a guide, and a true friend. Officer John had seen something in Marcus that no one else had, a strength, a resilience that had been buried beneath years of hardship. And now Marcus was starting to see it too. One day, as Marcus worked late into the evening, finishing up some tasks on the construction site, he received a message from Officer John. The text was simple, but it carried so much weight. "I'm proud of you. I've been keeping track of everything you're doing. Keep going. You've got a bright future ahead of you." Marcus stared at the screen for a moment, the words sinking in. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. To be proud of someone, to know that they believed in you, he had never had that before. Not from his family, not from anyone, but Officer John believed in him. And now Marcus believed in himself. The message sparked something inside him. The idea of a better life, a life where he wasn't just surviving, where he was thriving, became clearer. He knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The road he was on, the path he had started down, was one that could lead to something even greater. But Marcus wasn't just thinking about himself anymore. He thought about the other kids on the streets, the ones who were still stuck in the same place he had once been. He thought about the people who had lost hope, who didn't believe they could escape their circumstances. And he made a decision. He would help them. He would use his story to show them that it was possible to change, that they didn't have to stay trapped. He began to volunteer with organizations that helped homeless people, sharing his story and encouraging others to believe in themselves. He spoke to kids who were living on the streets, telling them that they didn't have to give up, that they could make something of their lives. It wasn't just about telling them what to do, it was about showing them that it was possible. Marcus had lived through it, and he was proof that change was possible. The more he volunteered, the more Marcus realized that he wanted to do more. The idea of helping people, of making a real difference in the world, became a driving force for him. He knew that he couldn't save everyone, that he couldn't solve all the problems, but he could do something, and that something mattered. One afternoon, as Marcus sat with a group of young people at a shelter, talking to them about the importance of hard work and determination, he was approached by a man he had never seen before. The man introduced himself as a representative of a local nonprofit organization that worked to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds get into law enforcement. They had heard about Marcus's story, and they were impressed by his commitment to giving back to the community. "We want to offer you a scholarship for a program that can train you to become a police officer," the man said. "You've got the heart and the drive. All you need is the right opportunity." Marcus was stunned. The thought of becoming a police officer had always seemed like a distant dream, something he never considered possible. But here it was, an opportunity to take everything he had learned, everything he had experienced, and use it to help others. To give back to the community, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, and to make sure that no one else had to go through what he had gone through. It wasn't an easy decision, but Marcus knew what he had to do. He accepted the scholarship and began the rigorous training required to join the program. It was a long road ahead, filled with challenges, but Marcus was ready. He had spent his life overcoming obstacles, and this was just another one to conquer. As the months passed, Marcus continued his work at the construction site while also training for the police program. He worked long hours, often staying up late to study, but he didn't mind. Every step was a step closer to his goal. And with each day he felt stronger, more capable, and more determined than ever. His story, once one of struggle and hardship, had become one of triumph. He had gone from being a homeless boy, just trying to survive, to a young man with a future, a man with a purpose. And he wasn't stopping here. Marcus knew that his journey was just beginning. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, but he was ready for them. He had already faced some of the toughest moments in life, and he had come out stronger on the other side. As the day of his graduation from the program approached, Marcus stood in front of a mirror, looking at the uniform he had worked so hard to earn. It wasn't just a uniform. It was a symbol of everything he had overcome, of all the hard work he had put in, and of the future he had built for himself. He wasn't just the homeless boy from the streets anymore. He was Marcus, a man who had changed his own life, and now he was ready to change the lives of others.